When the world expected silence, when the world thought India would bow its head, when the United States under Trump believed pressure and dominance would dictate terms, something remarkable happened. India replied, and not in whispers, not in uncertainty, but in a voice so steady, so unshaken, that the entire world felt the tremor of its confidence. That reply came not with anger, not with shouting, but with precision, composure, and a deep sense of strength. That reply came from the diplomat who has mastered the art of silence as a weapon and words as missiles, JAISHANKAR. Now listen closely, because this moment is not just about one statement, it is about a shift in the world order. Trump, with his larger-than-life presence, believed that India could be cornered, that India could be pulled back into the orbit of American pressure, but India has changed. This is not the India of hesitation, not the India of uncertainty, not the India waiting for Western approval. This is an India that has learned the lessons of history, that has built its economy brick by brick, that has fortified its defense system missile by missile, and that has crafted its diplomacy word by word. When JAISHANKAR spoke, it wasn't just a reply to Trump. It was a reminder to the world that India no longer asks for space, it claims its place. His chilling words carried something beyond politics. They carried the weight of a civilization that has survived invasions, colonization, betrayals, and wars, and yet has risen every single time stronger than before. When he spoke, the tone wasn't aggressive, it was calm. But behind that calmness was the sharp edge of a blade, the kind of blade that cuts deeper because it doesn't announce itself with noise. The world has gotten used to America calling the shots, dictating terms, telling countries who to trade with, who to avoid, where to align. But when America tried to box India in, when Trump's words hinted at punishment, at sanctions, at pressure tactics, India didn't flinch. And that's what shook the world. For decades, smaller nations trembled when the U.S. raised its voice. But this time, India simply looked back with eyes that said, "We are not afraid." What did JAISHANKAR really do? He delivered a masterclass in how a nation asserts power without raising its voice. He reminded the U.S. that India's decisions are not up for negotiation, that India chooses its partners based on interest, not intimidation. And that reply carried a deeper lesson for every Indian listening. True strength is not about shouting louder. It's about standing firm when others expect you to bend. Understand this. Power is not just about military might, not just about how many aircraft carriers or nuclear weapons you have. Power is also psychological. It is the ability to speak so clearly that your opponent realizes there is no weakness to exploit. When JAISHANKAR spoke, Trump and the world saw that India has no cracks in its armor. India's diplomacy has matured to the point where it doesn't need validation from Washington or Brussels. It speaks and the world listens. Think about the brilliance of timing. The United States expected compliance. It expected India to step back from Russia, to distance itself from independent choices, to behave like an obedient partner. Instead, India reminded the world that it will not sacrifice its interests on someone else's altar. It was chilling not because it was loud, but because it was cold, calculated, and final. That is the kind of reply that doesn't just end a conversation. It resets the terms of engagement. The world was stunned because they realized India is no longer playing catch-up. It is playing its own game. For the first time, nations looked at Trump's America and saw someone being outmaneuvered, not with threats, not with bluster, but with quiet defiance. And let me tell you this, quiet defiance is the most dangerous form of resistance because it comes with confidence. Every Indian who heard that reply should understand something important. This was not just about international diplomacy. This was about teaching every individual the art of standing tall in front of giants. You don't have to shout. You don't have to fight on their terms. You just have to be unshakable in your conviction. That is what makes people stop, think, and respect you. Trump wanted to remind India who's boss. Instead, he got reminded that India doesn't take orders. The world saw that even the most powerful man in America could not bend India's spine. That's why the word chilling fits so perfectly, because it froze the arrogance of those who thought India was still the silent bystander. Look at the reaction across the globe. Allies of America began whispering among themselves, if India can do this, why can't we? Smaller nations suddenly saw a path. They saw that maybe, just maybe, they too could resist the old order. The global South, long waiting for a voice, found its flag bearer in India. They realized that India is not just speaking for itself. It is speaking for billions who have been ignored, bullied, and sidelined. That's why the reply wasn't just India's. It was a spark for something bigger. Now let's break this down. What makes JAISHANKAR'S style so devastating? First, he never reacts emotionally. He doesn't let provocation dictate his tone. Second, he doesn't waste words. Every sentence is a weapon, carefully aimed. And third, he knows the weight of silence. When a man of such composure speaks, the world leans in, because they know he doesn't speak lightly. And when his words carried India's defiance, the silence in Washington was louder than the applause in Delhi. But here's the truth. This moment was decades in the making. India has been building toward this reply since independence. Every sacrifice, every reform, every soldier standing on the border, every scientist building rockets, every entrepreneur lifting the economy, it all led to this kind of confidence. Without economic strength, words are hollow. Without military strength, diplomacy is weak. Without cultural identity, confidence is shallow. But India today has all three, and that's why the reply hit with such force. Trump underestimated something very important, the pride of a nation that knows its worth. You can pressure a weak man, you can scare someone who doubts themselves, but you cannot intimidate someone who has clarity of purpose. India has clarity, it knows its path. It knows that its future will not be written in Washington, London, or Beijing. It will be written in Delhi, in Mumbai, in Bangalore, in every city and village that carries the spirit of resilience. The chilling part of the reply wasn't just what was said. It was what it represented. It represented the death of an old narrative where the West dictated terms. It represented the dawn of a multipolar world where no single country can hold others hostage. It represented a nation telling its people, we no longer live under shadows, we cast our own light. And if you're listening to this speech today, I want you to take something away not just about India, but about yourself. Life will always have people who try to play Trump with you, people who try to pressure you, people who try to dictate your path, people who believe their power is enough to crush your will. But your strength lies in your reply. Not in anger, not in begging, not in retreat, but in calm, firm conviction. Learn from that reply. Carry that confidence. Let your silence sometimes speak louder than their threats. India showed the world that respect is not demanded, it is commanded. You command it by knowing who you are, by standing unafraid, by refusing to bend even when the odds seem stacked against you. That is the message in JAISHANKAR'S chilling statement. That is why the world was stunned. Think of it this way, a storm can make noise, but a mountain stands. A threat can shout, but a calm voice of truth can silence even the loudest rooms. India was the mountain. Trump was the storm. And when the storm passed, the mountain was still there, stronger than ever. And so, the story continues. India will rise further. The U.S. will adjust. The world will recalculate. But one thing has been made clear forever. India does not bend. It does not compromise its sovereignty. It does not silence itself to please others. And as long as it continues this way, no one, not even the greatest powers, can deny its place at the center of the global stage. That, my friends, is why the world was stunned. That is why India's reply will be remembered, and that is why every one of us should carry this lesson. When you know your value, when you refuse to bend, when you speak with clarity, the world has no choice but to listen. It marked the birth of India's assertive military doctrine backed by innovation. The world realized that India is no longer a participant, it is now a power center. For decades, India played cautiously on the global stage, maintaining a defensive stance, always reacting to threats rather than proactively shaping the environment around it. But as time evolved, as economic strength merged with technological progress and political willpower, the doctrine of India shifted. This shift was not a moment of accident, but of design, forged through countless challenges and crises. Nations had underestimated India because they saw its restraint as weakness, not realizing that restraint was a choice grounded in patience, and patience always has an expiry date. When India unveiled its assertive military doctrine, the message was loud and clear, even if spoken in diplomatic tones. It was a doctrine not limited to war, but a doctrine of power projection, deterrence, and independence. It told the world that India was no longer going to be reactive, it was going to set the tempo. Innovation became its backbone because India knew it could not outspend the United States on weapons, nor could it match China's massive production lines in sheer quantity. But India could outthink, outdesign, and outmaneuver with smarter systems, leaner technology, and sharper minds. The world saw this transition and realized that India was not in the room as a silent observer anymore. It was sitting at the table as an equal, reshaping the rules of the game. Consider the strides made in missile systems, where India's indigenous programs began producing weapons that stunned even advanced militaries. The agility of the BrahMos, the reach of the Agni series, the precision of the Akash-NG, all signaled that India was not relying on hand-me-downs or outdated imports. It was creating, innovating, and leading. That innovation stretched beyond the battlefield into space, where satellites gave India eyes sharper than ever, and into cyber, where a quiet but effective doctrine of digital defense emerged. No longer could adversaries assume India was a decade behind. Now they feared India might be a decade ahead in the areas that mattered most. That shift unsettled power balances. The doctrine was assertive because it was layered with intent. India would not start conflicts recklessly, but it also made it clear that aggression against it would be met with overwhelming response. The idea of punitive strikes, surgical operations, and rapid deployment forces became institutionalized. This was not the India of hesitation. This was an India preparing to end conflicts quickly and decisively, minimizing prolonged wars, projecting the image of a state that values strength and speed equally. Such doctrine, combined with innovation, gave birth to deterrence far more effective than endless diplomacy alone. The chilling part for the world was not just India's weapons, but India's mindset. A nation once seen as soft power-heavy, culture-driven, and hesitant to project military force was now combining that cultural diplomacy with steel. It was like watching a peaceful monk slowly put on armor. The contrast was enough to shake old assumptions. Rivals like Pakistan suddenly realized that the game had changed. China, long confident in its military, industrial complex, now looked at India's smart investments with caution. Even the United States, with all its allies and resources, understood that India's independent doctrine meant it could not be treated as a junior partner. That realization stunned them most. For the first time in modern history, the world began to place India in conversations not as a balancing force, but as a central power. Nations measured their policies around India, knowing its voice could sway economic corridors, strategic alliances, and security frameworks. The Quad, BRICS, G20, all these platforms began orbiting differently because India no longer came just to participate in discussions, but to influence decisions. The doctrine of assertiveness expanded beyond military matters into foreign policy, creating a consistency between battlefield preparation and diplomatic language. Both said the same thing: India will decide for itself, and others must respect that decision. The confidence behind the doctrine came from innovation. India's engineers, scientists, and strategists had created a base of self-reliance that few expected. A country once heavily dependent on foreign imports for defense was now exporting to other nations. Fighter jets equipped with Indian avionics, drones designed in Indian labs, submarines powered by Indian systems, all signaled a transformation from buyer to builder. This transformation was not just technical, it was psychological. It told the world that India had broken the cycle of dependency and was ready to write its own playbook. And when a nation builds with its own hands, it guards with its own heart. That is why the doctrine had depth for America. Trump's pressure campaign was supposed to force India to pick a side. But what emerged was a reply that shocked the strategic community. India said, in its own words, that it will not choose sides. It will choose itself. That stance, supported by the credibility of its military doctrine, made the United States understand that leverage was gone. India could not be boxed into compliance when it had the means to defend itself militarily, economically, and diplomatically. This was not rebellion. It was declaration. It was the declaration that India was no longer a participant invited into rooms of power, but the power for which rooms had to be built. That shift of perception is what shook the world most. At the core of this was deterrence psychology. Military strength is not only about winning wars. It is about preventing wars by being so prepared, so innovative, that no adversary dares to test you. India's assertive doctrine, built on innovation, created this exact effect. Pakistan, with its unstable politics and fragile economy, suddenly realized escalation would be suicidal. China, despite its size, saw that India's alliances, terrain advantages, and resilient doctrine meant conflict would be costly. Even Russia, traditionally a supplier, looked at India as a partner shaping multipolarity, and the U.S., which tried to impose, found itself negotiating instead. This is what true power does. It forces others to adapt to your terms globally. This signaled something bigger. The world order has long been about participants and power centers. Participants sit at the table, nod along, and try to secure their piece of stability. Power centers set the table, decide the meal, and determine who gets invited. India had moved from participant to power center, not by demanding it, but by earning it. The chilling reply to Trump was simply the verbal confirmation of a reality already visible on the ground. The world realized it, markets realized it, militaries realized it, and people across nations began to adjust their expectations. A multipolar world was no longer theoretical, it was operational, with India as one of its anchors. When JAISHANKAR delivered that line, the weight wasn't in the sound, it was in the substance. Behind those words stood missiles ready, armies disciplined, economies resilient, and a people determined. That's why it stunned the world, not because it was unexpected, but because it was undeniable. No amount of spin could dismiss the fact that India's posture had changed permanently. And once a doctrine shifts from defensive to assertive, once innovation becomes inseparable from military thinking, a nation doesn't return to old ways. It forges ahead, demanding recognition through action rather than requests. This permanence is what made global powers pause. They realized the balance had tilted. India is no longer the cautious participant it once was. Its military doctrine, backed by innovation and framed with assertive clarity, has made it a power center. The world has no choice but to adjust to this new reality, because ignoring it would mean ignoring the momentum of history itself.